The jargon around learning spaces, the jargon around curriculum mean that on the one hand, your architects exclude educators from understanding what the possibilities are. And on the other hand, the educator excludes the architect and designer from understanding what they are trying to do. And that's the gap that we've been more than happy to fill.
You're listening to the Blue Skies Leadership Podcast, featuring discussions with international school leaders about the future of education. The podcast embodies the spirit of reciprocity by sharing strategies and change initiatives from leading schools around the world. Here are your hosts, Dan Kerr and Daniel Mendez.
So Dan, we've got Ewan McIntosh on the show today, and I'm super excited because he talks a lot about the third teacher in the classroom, the learning environment. And I'm wondering about an experience that you may have that may have shaped your life.
Oh, let me think. Probably so many. I had a social studies and English teacher in grade 7 named Mrs. Turner, and I liked her very much. But the special thing about her and that classroom was that she had this amazing little classroom library space. And I was not much of a reader at that age. I mean, I would read the sports section and stuff, but never a novel. And she introduced me to a book called The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. And I just remember really falling in love with reading in that little tiny special classroom library nook that was cozy. And there's something about that. So I went down a rabbit hole of S.E. Hinton. I read all those books and I've kind of fallen in love with reading ever since. So I'll never forget Mrs. Turner's little classroom library. So what about you?
For me, it was grade 1 and it was Mrs. Darling. There was something about that woman, the way that she set up her classroom. It was so nice and cozy, just like you were talking about, but just the way she used lighting, and she always had flowers, and then she always smelled a certain way. And it was just comforting. And then I just wanted to be around her. Of course, she taught me how to read. My parents were immigrants to Canada, so I learned my English through school, and she's always stayed with me for all these years. She's recently passed away, and so it's just fond memories of her.
Oh, I love that. Well, I'm excited to get Ewan McIntosh into this conversation because I know he's going to talk a little bit about the third teacher and how we can use space to inspire learning. So let's get him here. Well, we're always thrilled to share perspectives that challenge the boundaries of education. And this week's guest is a true visionary in that area.
We're joined by Ewan McIntosh, the dynamic force behind Notosh. Ewan's career is a fascinating blend of classroom experience and creative industry insights, all focused on transforming learning.
Ewan began his journey as a high school teacher in Scotland, where he was among the first in Europe to use podcasting and blogging in daily lessons. He then took his expertise to the Scottish government and later to Channel 4 before founding Notosh.
And it's at Notosh that Ewan's passion for design thinking and learning really shines. He's a sought-after keynote speaker and consultant known for his ability to energize and inspire. We're thrilled to have him with us today. Welcome, Ewan.
That was good fun. Thank you for having me. That's what my mother always told me to say. Thanks for having me. Well, not offered a cup of tea yet, but thanks.
Well, this would be fun. In your opinion, where is the world of international school heading? Where should it be heading? And maybe what should we all be prioritizing to bring this vision to life? What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting because one of the big activities that we always do at some point in strategy making with schools is talking about vision. And vision for us is, what do you want to do? What do you want to achieve? And it should be something that is achievable. A lot of schools talk about vision like it's some kind of, we'll never make it there, but this is what we dream of. I think that's a road to depression. You know, I think it was Mo Godat said the secret to happiness is low expectations. And a good vision should be something that you can actually, I think, achieve. So focusing on the things that you're really good at and doubling down on them probably gives you an answer for you as to where your personal blue sky vision is. And if you do that with a whole school community, you can start to get to the point where you work out where your community's blue sky vision is, because it's going to be based on something that's right under your nose today. So I don't want to pull out the 100-slide PowerPoint deck with all the things you need to think about for the future. This is where you should be going. I think my answer to blue sky vision is look under your nose, see where you've already got big strengths that you can really go to town on, forget anything that doesn't then contribute towards realizing that. And I think that you speak to any middle leader in a school, they'll often feel between a rock and a hard place, or like Dr. Doolittle's push me, pull you, that they've got a vision. They understand where their strength is as a team, but there's something holding them back. The handbrake is on because there's curriculum constraints coming from on high. There's perception that the boss wants us to do A, B, or C, but we want to do X, Y, and Z. And I think the number one way to overcome that is conversation and dialogue. Talk about where you feel your strengths are. Talk about the vision that you have where you feel, if we double down on this, we could become that. Think less about what you want to do and more about who you want to become as a team, as a department, as a grade level, as an elementary school, as a whole school. And I think the more conversations you have, the more frequently along those lines, the more chance that when you do come around to those big moments of, we're going to create a strategic plan, you've actually got the answer already about what your vision is. And then work hard to make it happen. And avoid the word excellence at all costs, because that's not a vision. That's a very vague success criteria that doesn't really work.
Good points there. When you're speaking here, you're summarizing two other podcasts that we have had in the past. Richard Berner talked about you got to work on a position of strength, capitalize on what you do well at your school or your environment that you're in. But then you're also talking Bambi bets in the sense of what are your constraints and work to remove them so that you can be doing the wonderful things that you want in that vision.
I was doing a workshop earlier this week with part board, part executive leadership team, looking at how they communicate some big changes they're making in their school. And they've made some errors already. They made a communication about a strategic choice that's huge and emotional for people. And now they've got this challenge of communication. They're on the back foot. They're often a little bit defensive and apologetic almost for this big move they've made. But the move was essential. It's going to open up more choices for young people. It's going to reduce costs for sure. There is a danger of when you look at the constraints as you're trying to buff it out through communication. We've got this constraint that's going to actually compromise our vision a little bit, but we'll just buff it out with some communication. And like you say, it's really important to name what the barriers are. If it's a piece of work that you can stop doing, so actually doing the work is the barrier, stop doing it. It's outside your control. I would actually say that to a certain degree, you have to ignore it. If you focus on things that you have no control over, they grow in importance. It's Stephen Covey's kind of circle of influence and circle of concern. So if you're focusing on all the reasons why you cannot realize this dream, this vision that you've got, sure as hell, it's not going to get realized. If you focus on the elements that you do need to work on, so you're building on strengths, but there's always going to be something new to learn, something new to make it happen. Focus on that, put all your energy into that, because the energy that you put into worrying about stuff you have no control over is energy completely wasted. I think all of us have done it in our career, and all of us wince when we think of projects that have been compromised because we focused on the stuff that we actually had no control over. There was no point in us worrying about it. And a lot of what is concerning senior leaders at the moment, particularly in State Department funded schools, for example, you're seeing people compromise their vision left, right, and centre because they're worried about something very much outside of their control. Without wanting to sound flippant at all, I think that it's the wrong strategy to worry about all of that and to talk about it and to actually inflate its importance. I think what you do is you double down on your strengths. What are you good at? And if you're good at running a school with 68 languages and all this incredible richness in your school community, then you double down on that and you show what's possible with that incredible collection of people under one roof. And you don't focus on the thing that you have no control over.
Well said.
Yeah, that's inspiring.
You started to mention some of the schools that you work with. I know that your company, Notosh, been around for a while. We'd love to hear what you're working on that you'd like to highlight.
I mean, Notosh is with 15 years we've been around now. And
has it been 15 years?
15. Wow. I know I look so young. Yeah, 15. Wow. I think that we've evolved. I think there are probably different chapters as well that people recognize. We've got bored, frankly, of doing some stuff that today is fashionable. So a lot of our initial work in design thinking for learning, looking at thinking routines, promoting the work of Harvard Project Zero when people didn't even know that it was there. After 25 years, we felt like we were breaking the news to people that they were there. You know, we've got bored of doing that. Today, It's really fashionable. I wish that we were still doing quite as much design thinking for learning, because people have got into thinking about thinking routines, what meta skills are required for students to take more responsibility for their learning. That's actually what Notosh started on. No tosh, no nonsense. It was to cut through the edubabble that got in the way of young people being able to take ownership over their learning. Pretty much the 10 years up until the pandemic, that was the mainstay of our work, talking about learning, teaching, thinking skills. And the first international schools that we introduced it to, places like American School in Japan, I had a smile on my face last year because they were doing the same thing, but calling it new, that we were been doing with them back in 2012. But when we did it in 2012, we were remarkably unfashionable. And this seems to follow me around. I was the kid at school that wore those. Do you remember the Pepe sailor boots shoes with the little leather strap on the outside?
For sure.
I wore them for 6 months before anyone else in school wore them. And it was pretty much the day I stopped wearing them that everyone started wearing them. With a lot of our design thinking for learning work, that's what's maybe happened there.
You are a trendsetter. I think that's one of the things that happens in international schools with so much turnover in leadership and in people. Like, some of these ideas keep coming around and around and around. And that might be a topic for another podcast.
I find it quite challenging. My parents were teachers, and I was brought up at a kitchen table with the words, "Oh, here we go again." They were long enough in the profession, very much of it in the same school. My father was a principal teacher of music for 33 years in the same school. I heard maybe twice these fashion hype circles come round at the dinner table. So I'm not averse to it. I know it happens. I think that the work that we've been doing probably for the last decade, and it really took off actually during the pandemic, was strategy work. And a lot of that strategy work was to get over the idea of fashion. Strategy dictated by fashions. People were keen to explore. What we'd seen up until that point is that strategic planning was essentially a laundry list of actions to do, and it was very top down, and it wasn't very inspiring. And most strategic plans didn't actually end up following through on most of the vision or direction that was there. By the third year, people were a little bit hackneyed, thinking about what's going to happen to the next one. So when we think about strategy, we're digging deep into the community. We call it looking below, which is it kind of, let's see what's in our community under our nose. We also look at what other schools are doing. You know, is there cool stuff out there? Is there a sense of movement that's going, that might be verging on fashionable, but then we counter it with the heritage of the school. So what's your secret sauce? What's the element that we should be building on? Back to that question of strengths and what we should do. And it's the combination of views, all these different viewpoints, that helps you to create something that survives fashion and actually builds on what long-term strength that you've got as a school. I think came to its fore during COVID because you had two camps. You had this camp of scenario planning, coming up with endless scenario plans of what could happen, and then discovering, and in fact, I remember Richard Berner talking about the fact they developed 3 or 4 scenarios, and then the mayor of the city decided, oh, we're going to do this thing instead. And they all went up in the air and they had to improvise anyway. And I think that in times of crises, your improvisation skills are probably more important than being able to read the musical chart. Whereas when we're coming up with strategy, what we're trying to work out is, well, what's the musical chart? And within that musical chart, there's room for improvisation. There's room for soloists. There's rooms for going a little bit slower. There's the presto where we pick up speed and we have momentum because it's that time of year. There's a natural give and take in a school year. There's natural energy in school years. There's natural energy that new hires bring, the new director brings, that you need to take advantage of. Strategy is what gives you an ability to rise above fashion and do what's right by your whole community, rather than the first thought coming into the director's head might be. That's been some of the most enjoyable work because the impact of it has been really quite deep, very broad. We've done this now in over 70 countries with hundreds of leadership teams. Although our process remains the same, but evolves as we learn, but the process is largely the same. What it permits the schools to do, because each one of them is unique, they come up with something that is really quite different from one school to the next, even if they're in the same city. Especially if they're in the same city, they come up with ideas that are quite unique to them.
It allows schools to really understand who they are as institutions and contextually what is the way forward for our particular community at this particular time, leveraging all the strengths and the people that you have in the building. And that's what I really appreciate of the work that you and and Notosh do is that you really bring your work to that particular school in that particular context, and you leave with that school understanding and getting a better sense of who they are as an educational place. And I think that's important for all schools to see themselves as unique to themselves as opposed to pitting themselves against other schools in the region or the world.
We've had examples where we were maybe tasked with creating a strategic plan and we didn't actually succeed because the school did not have an idea of who they were, but we'd left them with a very clear sense of their identity, who they are. A good example would be the American School of Warsaw. A decade ago, we came in, we created a fresh mission and core values for them. Those core values were the stick in the sand that they needed to know who they were. And the net result was that this potential strategic plan was far less important than giving people time to align everything they did to those core values. That was the strategy. And it was remarkably successful. And the school has gone strength to strength in the back of it.
I've seen firsthand how mission and core values can really change the future of a school. What I hear you talking about is knowing that story and being able to retell that story of that school so that they know who they are is equally as important.
It's helpful that most school missions are nonsense and don't actually serve that purpose at all. I say that as a caveat for most people listening to this. They'll be thinking, what? Our mission doesn't really tell us who we are. There's either buzzwords and jargon that are exclusionary, so they keep people out, or it's a word soup of stuff that sort of has something to do with school, but they're not representing choices. And so that's one of the things, whether it's strategy or coming up with your mission, which is part of strategy. Working out who you are is core to strategy. I've got an example here where we've taken, I think, 5 or 6 schools so that they were not identifiable. And we put their missions into one mission word soup. And you get this, our mission is to provide a comprehensive standards-based education that encourages critical thinking, creativity, and lifelong learning, all the C's. We aspire to cultivate a diverse community of learners who are socially responsible and ethically conscious individuals, instilled with a passion for academic excellence. And it's absolute twaddle. That's not a rude word, you don't have to beep it. But it's nonsense. The way you know it's nonsense is, can you say the opposite? And if the opposite is a genuine choice that you could have made as a school, then you've got a great mission. But if the opposite is psychopathic, you've probably not made a choice. You're probably not really defining who you are. We all have a baseline of humanity. We all have that baseline of humanity unless we're a psychopath. So we assume that most people in our schools are not psychopaths. We don't need to remind them to be honest and kind and empathetic. If you want to know the definition of a psychopath, you just Google the Hare psychopathy test and you get all the criteria. If you're using the opposite of those words in your mission statement or your vision, then you're lost, because it doesn't define who you are over and above what it takes to be human. So the opposite of that pretty typical mission statement would be something like, our mission is to provide a limited standards-free education that encourages sloppy thinking, dullness, and one-and-done learning. We aspire to cultivate a homogeneous group of learners, each out for themselves, who are socially irresponsible and morally callous individuals, instilled with only a passing interest in academics. Sound like anyone you know?
No.
You don't want a school like that. No one would choose to make a school like that. So don't choose the opposite, because that's not a choice. You're just describing what schools do. So your mission, your reason for being, your purpose needs to describe what you do over and above all the stuff that basic humans can do. And when you get that, it helps everyone day to day make the best possible choices for their learners, for their families, for community.
I saw you present at the AAIE conference not that long ago. And one of the sessions that I saw you and Dr. Katrina Moran present on, I was inspired by the idea of the third teacher in one of your sessions. And you were talking about using space and design to positively impact student learning and culture. And can you share a little bit about that with our listeners?
100%. It's an interesting thing, because when you work on strategy with a school, generally at some point you end up talking about where the learning's happening. A great teacher could teach under a tree, frankly, and it would be great. And in some of my best classes at school was my Latin teacher, who literally taught us under a tree. And I walked away with some of my happiest learning memories from that. However, I think there's also a case for thinking about, how does this space that we learn in actually amplify the good bits of what we're trying to do? If I am looking for a more interdisciplinary approach to learning, but actually we're going to bring the the science teacher together with the English teacher to look at the poetry of science.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to bring 3 disciplines together round through that. So we're going to bring a little bit of poetry. We're going to bring some of the science, biology, maybe some chemistry, and we're going to do experimentation, and we're going to do creative writing around that experimentation, and we're going to try and create scientific poetry. I am making this up as I go, so apologies to scientists and English teachers. But then the question comes, well, where are we going to do it? So if it's in a classroom with a carpet, straight away, there's a limit to how much boom and explosion and mess we can make. Second, if it's in a classroom, are we being poets or scientists? If it's in a science lab, are we able to be poets in a science lab? I know which one I'd prefer to do it in. I'd probably want to do it in a science lab. And then the question is, well, what's the role of the educators in that? Because a lot of science labs are still set up, frankly, around the teacher desk, a bit like a university lecture hall. So teachers still front and center, still the prophetic one telling everyone what to do. There's so many choices schools have to make around space, and it's probably the biggest investment they make. I mean, they are the most expensive thing you can do in schools after paying your staff is invest in a physical space.
Right.
But how schools choose their designers is a mystery. Most people just go for word of mouth, or we used them the last time, and you wonder why so many schools look the same and repeat the same mistakes, because it's the same architects. They fall for the first person they've been recommended. Maybe they come to your school and say, oh, I wouldn't mind a bit of that. And so they copy what works for you, hoping it will work for them, but they're missing the fact that they've got pedagogues with a particular vision that works for them, building on particular strengths that works for them. The worst case is when you get this kind of educational tourism and they go off to Melbourne and then they think, yeah, that will work in Mumbai. And then they wonder why it doesn't 3 years and $20 million later. And we've got people saying, we want an innovative learning environment, but that's not defined. They don't know what they mean by innovation. What do you mean by that? An innovative learning environment for that interdisciplinary lesson that I've just described merely means a lab, but with enough circulation space for 2 teachers to work around, and maybe 2 presenting or 3 presenting zones, so that the 2 teachers can each have things up and the students can also airplay some of what they're doing to another screen, with experiment space that they can do and no carpet so they can make as much mess as they like, but with good acoustics so that when they're reading poetry, everyone can hear it. There's a lot going on there. And it all comes down to one question, which is, what's the experience that you're trying to create? And if you don't know the answer to that question, then your space will not work for you. It will go wrong. It will be substandard. It will get in your way. It will prevent you actually starting some new ideas in learning and teaching. We always say you've got 3 things to do to answer that question. One is, when you've got a hunch that you want to try teaching or learning in a particular way, prototype it. Go and try. In your current crummy space that doesn't quite work, go and try that stand-up maths lesson and you'll discover how, it's awful. The kids can't talk to each other because they're talking to the back of each other's heads. There's not enough room for them to stand up and use the walls because there's too much furniture in the room. One school that we worked with, it was a really painful contract actually, about 18 months ago in Southeast Asia, where they said they wanted more stand-up maths, more kind of student agency, more. And then an operations manager who they brought in halfway through the project said, no, we don't want these kind of spaces. We frankly need 28 tables and chairs so that every child can be seated behind a desk. It's like, okay, you can have that, but you can't have anything else in that vision. And then you suddenly realize the vision wasn't actually their vision at all. They didn't have a vision. And not having a vision, not having clarity means you make really expensive mistakes and you waste people's time. I think the second out of the 3 things is using meaningful language. So the jargon around learning spaces, the jargon around curriculum mean that on the one hand, your architects exclude educators from understanding what the possibilities are. And on the other hand, the educator excludes the architect and designer from understanding what they are trying to do. And that's the gap that we've been more than happy to fill because we understand both worlds. We're able to help them understand each other, but we're able to do the third thing, which is provoke. An architect does not have the credibility educationally to push ahead of school and say, are you serious? Is that your vision? Have you ever thought about doing X, Y, or Z? We do, and we do it every day. And likewise, an educator really feels they've got the credibility to push back on an architect and say, are you serious? This isn't going to work for what we're trying to do. That's why being provocative helps people actually discover exactly what they want and what they want that experience to be. And then they go back in that virtuous circle. Prototype it, talk about it with meaningful language, provoke more change. And when you do that a few times, you'll end up with a school you would never have dreamed of designing in the first place.
You're reminding me about 15 years ago, I started a video broadcasting program at a previous school. I was so excited. I got all this money to build. I got, cameras and this and that. And I'm standing in my new studio. And then I'm like, oh, there's no tables in here. How am I going to teach? Oh. It wasn't that my function was informing form, but form was informing my function. I was like, how am I going to teach in this class now? And it was one of those situations where I flipped my class. I had to put the tutorials online and have the kids working with the equipment. And then just the other day, working with one of our teachers here at our school, he wanted to flip his unit. And what I noticed in the class when I was working with that teacher is all the kids started moving the tables because the teacher was like, I need more movement in here so I can get to all the students. Just changed the way his room looked just based on the function of how he was teaching. And it was just a great moment where I just smiled and exactly what you were just saying.
That's it. But you want to do that before you spend 20 million. You want to make sure that you've worked out what you need before you sign the check.
Absolutely.
And that's why the process is so important. I think it's undervalued. A lot of operations directors just want the job done. A lot of heads of schools think that it's not really their domain. A lot of teachers think that it's decided for them. Really, it's just like strategy. It needs everyone to be involved, to be clear on what the vision is, what we're trying to achieve, what that experience should feel like every day for every kid and the staff too.
You work with over 1,000 schools in over 70 countries. Talk to us a little bit about the journey over the past several years and how it's grown and evolved into the organization that it is now.
It's interesting. The first question people normally ask is, so how many people do you have in your team? And the answer has always been about 7. I like doing the work. So we've kept the team quite small. We absolutely use every technology at our disposal to make sure that we work as effectively as possible. And we're a kind of lean, mean machine in terms of keeping work organized. Getting there has taken a long time. When I first started out, it was literally post-it notes, because it was just me, post-it notes on the desk wall in front of me, managing projects that way. Very early on, I had a couple of things happen early on that helped. One was, as an alum of Edinburgh University, I got an invitation to take part in the MIT Entrepreneurship Centre course. Incredible duo called Ken Morse and Bill Ollett. They flew over and ran these workshops, and it was very dogmatic, and they talked for kind of 12 hours a day at you, but it was really good. And one of the goals that I wrote down was just around growth. How did I want to grow? And my growth idea wasn't about financials, and it wasn't about team members. It was about the idea that every school would recognize the importance of understanding the needs of the people it serves first before developing ideas about how to serve it. And it was born out of relatively short teaching career and working in government on education, where I realized that was not the norm. The norm was normally in boardrooms and darkened rooms. People would make decisions quite transactional, would make decisions for families and for learners. And I thought that was wrong. And I could see that the policies, the approaches, the practices that were being espoused by the Scottish Government, for example, when I worked for them, were largely based on teachers' perception of what was needed rather than necessarily going and actually listening to learners. When I started out 15 years ago, design thinking for learning was the mainstay. It was thinking about how to get students doing more of the hard work, asking more questions than teachers, taking on the heavy lifting of learning, co-designing curriculum, which at the time was so revolutionary that people didn't really like it. I had one international school educator in the front row say, oh, that's snake oil. There was just a misunderstanding about the idea that maybe students having agency was a good thing. And of course, now, like I said, it's kind of fashionable. People get it. It's interesting that the PYP in the primary year program in the International Baccalaureate, I saw very early drafts of their thinking around that. And it was essentially the Notosh design thinking for learning language that informed it. So the immersion, having synthesis, ideation, prototyping, feedback, the meta skills attached to that are the approaches to learning that you see. I realized as well that our reputation was for being perhaps seen as a little bit daring and dangerous when it came to learning and teaching, which meant that the first times that we were asked to do strategy work, we were being asked to do strategy work by schools who wanted to be a bit risk-taking and daring. And so Nanjing International School, frankly, a lot of what we do is informed because their leadership team and board asked us a question and we said, yeah, we can do that. We had no idea half the time what we were doing, but we said, yeah, we can do that. And we designed it together, and for which we are eternally grateful. We've developed 2 runs of strategy with them, their approach using design thinking for learning that got them started quite a lot of their inquiry work in middle school, high school in particular. 2 award-winning learning environments for the early years on the one hand and the whole school for students on the other. All of that stems from asking a question to push things out of the comfort zone, to go beyond what's comfortable, to be a bit adventurous. And we're lucky that we've had really adventurous schools over the years. Rethinking your mission, creating a new strategy, thinking about a new approach to learning just for the sake of it is a good thing, because it knocks you out of that comfort zone, that okay plateau. And even if that's not the thing you end up pursuing, just the process of doing it helps you discover something new that keeps you keen and keeps you learning.
Yeah, I agree. At the start of this call, you had joked with us that in the last, month or 2 months, you've been in South America and North America and Europe and Australia. We're just kind of wondering, where are the next couple of months taking you? Are you on a plane? Do you get some time to be home? What does it look like for the next 6 or 7 months for you?
I think there's a myth that I travel a lot. I'm probably one of the least traveled consultants out there. So when I travel, it's actually on my terms. It's normally to say hi to people that we've worked with, and I create a really effective, efficient route that allows me to see loads of people in one pretty quick visit. It means I don't spend too long away from my family, but also the nature of the work we're doing means I've got to be at home. I've got to be at this desk. We've just finished an 18-month project where we were creating the education brief for the government of Western Australia for 980 existing schools and any new school that's constructed in the next 20 years. You do not create that kind of work by flying around the world, ping-ponging between cities and doing the same workshop time and time again. You do it by spending quality time with people in Western Australia to understand their needs. You then need a lot of time in the peace and quiet of home, being able to go out for a walk, being able to read a book, being able to do your research. So most of my time is spent at home. The next little while, a lot of it is in Southeast Asia and Australia. We have an office in Australia, so we do a lot of work there. We're in the process of working with 2 teams on a competition for designing probably the most innovative, exciting new school in Southeast Asia. Crossing our fingers. We have a work at the moment. If we get it all, we're in trouble. If we don't get any of it, we're in trouble. It's that phase in the year. So a lot of that requires proposal writing, thinking through planning, and then gearing up, planning the team's time so that if we do end up with the happy problem of having these, that no one gets neglected.
I hope this all comes true for you. And you said Southeast Asia, so I hope that possibly involves us tip through Vietnam so we can take you out for dinner or something.
That's a tempting offer.
If people want to contact you from the comfort of your own office there, how do they contact you? What's the best way to contact you?
You can go to notosh.com and there you can get in touch. We've got the usual contact forms and what have you. We've also got our weekly newsletter. And what's really interesting is every Monday we put this out about 7 o'clock, wherever you are. And people reply to it. And they say, oh, this is just what I needed this week. It's a newsletter called The Provocation that's designed to make you look really quite smart for the rest of the week, to give you something to talk about in your meetings, a kickoff for your assembly that you didn't prepare at the weekend because you had a life and you want to spend time with your kids instead. So it's definitely worth subscribing. It's free. You can unsubscribe if you think it's nonsense. That's probably actually the best way to keep in touch, because when I write something that it's thoughtful, and then people's replies are really thoughtful. And so you end up in a lovely dialogue about stuff and things that are going on in school. You don't just have to get in touch because you need a strategy written or you want a workshop on pedagogy or a new learning space. I think that's the key. And if you're interested in working together on a project, I think people are sometimes shy about that. Just get in touch. It's interesting. It sometimes takes 9 months, 2 years for a project to actually feel right, that we're ready to go and do it. There's no point in waiting those 2 years before you ask. You're better to start the dialogue. So notosh.com is by far the easiest way to get started.
Excellent. And this has been such a wonderful conversation. We've enjoyed listening to what you've been working on. It's been a fun, light conversation with you. So thank you so much.
I've known you for quite a while now, and I always get drawn in to when you're talking about education and business and schools. And I certainly felt that today. And I just want to thank you in sharing your perspectives with our listeners. And thank you for taking the time, Ewan.
Thanks for the invitation, and best wishes to everyone listening for the rest of the year ahead.
Thank you for listening to the Blue Skies Leadership Podcast. Do you know a specific leader who would be a great guest? Fill out all the details at blueskiesleadership.com.